What's up? James here from KartPulse, and we're going to kick it off with a live show today. We have a bit of a loose topic outline, but I'll bring on my co-host today, which is Eric Gunderson. Let's try that again. Eric, how are you doing? Good deal. So yeah, let's get it kicked off. We got two comments already. We're in trouble here. All right. So thanks for joining. And let's get the show on the road. See what we have here. So we put a topic up in the forums just to see how people would react, see if they have any questions or not. And we have one right here. So let's get straight into it. What have we got? Let's wait for it. Eric and I have been practicing on this software, but I'm not really sure if I practiced enough, to be totally honest. All right, here we go. So this is from Albert McCracken on the forums at KartPulse. And he said basically he'd like to see if there's a way that he can figure out, meander his way through all of these classes. One thing that's confusing is the idea of Yamaha pipe versus can. And he says here, not sure if this is too broad, but what I'd like to hear is a macro level overview of the different options in kart racing. Being a relatively new karter, there are always classes I'm hearing about that have funny names and don't mean anything to me. And if it's any consolation, Albert, some of us that are around the sport 20 years or more kind of feel the same way about funny names, and they're very confusing. For example, Yamaha pipe. Is that something that is just in enduro racing? I think Yamaha can was another. For someone considering getting into the sport or someone looking to try out another class, for example, after the 206 entry point, what are my options? Why should I want to run one of these old classes I hear people are saying are dying? That's a fair point. Why would I want to switch to a laydown kart? The first thing that comes to mind is not being able to run it at a normal kart track. Valid point, but there's a lot of advantages to road racing too. So finally, he finishes off the post by saying, I know guys that have only done sprint karts and guys that have also always run enduro laydown karts because that's what Daddy did. That could be controversial, but anyway, maybe a conversation around the pros and cons of all these directions you can go with karting, but trying to stay at a high level without the class war drama. That's a heavy one to kick the show off with right there.
Yeah,
So,
that's a big one to start.
what do you think, Eric?
Um, I think it's a really good question. I think it's something that I tried to address in the book that I wrote that has a section about that. But the unfortunate kind of in a nutshell answer is there's no magic bullet when it comes to one engine class, especially in the United States. Really, anywhere you go in the world, there are different engines that are in vogue at different times for different reasons. And worldwide, that's kind of an issue. Um, and I think that comes from kind of the consistent desire for people to try to reinvent the wheel. They want something that's faster, or they want something that's more reliable, or they want something that isn't as out of date. So it can get confusing. And it's one of the things that I see a lot of new karters get overwhelmed with. So you're definitely not alone, Albert, with that. Um, I would say that sprint kart racing versus laydown racing, that's an interesting debate. Now, I grew up and have most of my experience in sprint kart racing, so obviously that's maybe what I favor. But endurance and laydown racing is also compelling. You see a lot of very interesting creations and a lot of interesting designs in endurance and laydown racing. The rules are a little more wide open sometimes than in sprint kart racing, so kind of depends on what you're really going for. A lot of say more senior level drivers or people that really like that engineering challenge will look to road racing or endurance kart racing if they like the technical challenge of really designing the kart, as opposed to driving in a really tight box technically. So um, the Yamaha class, that Yamaha KT100 engine is one of the most well-known and renowned engines in karting. It's kind of defied the odds in terms of how long it's been around. Um, and as Albert mentioned, some people do race it with a pipe, some people race it with a can. For sprint kart racing, it's most common with a can. And the reason people call it a can is because the exhaust kind of looks like a can of beans or something
A
like that.
beer
It's about the
can?
same
Yeah.
size, yeah. Whereas the pipe is obviously more elongated and produces a little more power in the mid range and top end. So um, I don't know if really one is better than the other. One offers a little more performance in terms of speed. Um, but if we're looking at that engine specifically, I think a lot of people do have the sense that that engine is starting to go by the wayside. Not necessarily because it's a bad engine, but more just because the demands of, I guess, the quote unquote modern racer or the people that are buying engines or at least importing them has changed maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I think those are some fair points. I think my biggest bugbear about this is that, it is overwhelming. There's a ton of different classes, and we all know that this is a problem. And I think as kart racers and even clubs in some series and tracks, we have a tendency to amplify that by trying to explain all the options to people.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas my approach when I talk with people about the sport, and this happens on our forums too, is instead of trying to tell them about the different classes, even though that's what they might ask, we don't. We ask them more about what their unique situation is, their
Right.
locale, their budget, their expectations, and all those different things. And I think that's really the best way to go. You got to think a little bit about, if you're new, it's going to be more difficult to understand what's going to work for you, but you'll have a sense of what you're going to get the most enjoyment out of in kart racing. If you love to get your hands dirty and wrench a lot, then there's options for that. If you just want to drive and focus on driving, then there's options for that. And so I think that's really the core thing. It is very confusing, and it's not something that we're going to be able to change, or that might ever change. I mean, that's just the nature of karting in the US or any place that anybody can set up an organization and build a track and have people come. So I think the best thing that we can do is, as a community and as a group, just work together to, present the information that is going to give that person the most success and get them to enjoying driving as soon as possible. And, in a lot of cases in the past, that would have, some people would have recommended a tag. I think that for a lot of people is a really bad idea. Although tag is a quieter thing, more popular on the club level now, it's either X30 or Rock. But nonetheless, two stroke for me or you, Eric, and probably for, 70% of people watching here, we're used to two strokes. And, it's easy for us to forget how much a pain in the posterior you can be when you're trying to troubleshoot your pop off or whatever. To everyday people that are looking to get into the sport, you know, they don't really want to do it. They just want to drive, and either sport adapts to that or we die. And that's why, the 206 is, I think it's done so well. It's simple. There's parity out of the box. You pretty much know what you're getting, and you can get driving quickly without messing around.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that there's a couple interesting points there. The first one that I would say, Albert or really anyone, is really focus on realizing that within your region, especially in the United States, it really can vary in terms of what packages are in vogue or what are really common, and are going to be fun for you and easy for you to find parts and supports and knowledge, from region to region. So one of the first steps I recommend people to do is contact some of your local kart clubs, contact some of those people, um, involved in that, and find out what's popular in your area. Because ultimately, unless you really just want to stick to doing track days and kind of driving by yourself, eventually you do have to find another group of people to run with. Um, and the other thing is that there's kind of a general principle of with more speed comes more, complexity. So, a shifter kart engine, the people that have worked on them for a long, long time are usually kind of ahead of the curve and understand when the thing's going lean or when something's going flat, or can really work on them well. But when you first get involved in kart racing, that can be a little intimidating because there's so many different parts and components to keep track of. Many touch and go options over the years have really evolved to be very reliable, solid engine packages, but they are still a little bit more work and require more routine maintenance than, say, a 206 for most people. So I think it's also important to keep in mind, really, as James said, um, what your budgetary constraints are. What is really your focus? Are you really looking to become a master of your kart machine, or you simply just want to show up at the track, you want something that's going to work every time, and you want to just go enjoy racing? And that answer is going to vary from person to person.
yep, I totally agree. You got to figure out what's going to be fun for you. Jonathan Gasho left a comment and he said that you get a longer engine lifespan with the can. He's talking about the can on the
Yeah,
Yamaha here, and I
that's
mean
absolutely
that's the
true.
thing. That's the thing. Definitely not my personal taste, the can, but it's hugely popular and it works for people. We're going to have Tony Laporta join us here, and let's bring on Tony and see what he has to say. We'll just notify him here and we'll go live. What could possibly go wrong? Tony,
Mr. James, how are you?
I'm good. You're on the line here with also Eric Gunderson, who is in Colorado right now. And
Hey,
I
Tony.
think you hail from there, right? You
Yeah,
originally
I was
from?
gonna say I saw the promos for this, and Eric, I thought your name was familiar.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I've been in the area for a little while.
Yeah, yeah, you're forgive me if I'm getting the wrong series here, but you're doing the Colorado karting tour.
Oh, you got it right. Yeah, I am the current director of race day operations for that. So I'm pretty involved behind the scenes actively, and then also do a lot of admin work for a website called the Colorado Karter. Hang out with James a lot, talk about karting a lot. So pretty busy in the area.
Oh, I'm quite aware of the Colorado Carter. I'm from Colorado originally, and I grew up living on that website as a middle
Nice.
schooler and high schooler. So I am well aware of that website and what Angie McEwen and everybody out in Colorado did. But yeah, I thought the name was familiar, and I appreciate you guys having me on. I hope I can add something somewhat constructive, which is sort of the opposite of what I normally do.
Hey, you can add something entertaining. I mean, you've already got a scissors in your hand. I'm not sure what the deal is with that. You're gonna, what's the
Oh,
backstory?
I apologize. I didn't know you guys could see it. I'm just yeah. I'll put those down.
Good deal. So, what you got going on this year, Tony? What you got any karting events planned for announcing, or why don't we actually take a step back for people who don't know you? Tell us more about you.
Well, yeah. First, like I said, I appreciate you guys having me on. This is cool, and James, I love what you've been doing with this deal. And Eric, I'm sure whatever you're adding and bringing to the table will only make KartPulse stronger. But no, I'm just a guy who talks for a living. And it's funny because I don't even like to talk that much. But I raced go karts in Colorado as a teenage kid and loved it. Absolutely loved driving. Absolutely loved racing. IMI and Track at Centennial and Bandimere and all those places out there. I loved it. And but I'm just a bigger dude, and family wasn't racing folk. They didn't care about it, so I got out of driving pretty quick. And one day we were at a race at a track called IMI Motorsports in Dacono, Colorado, and a gruff, rough gentleman by the name of Kurt Kissler was the race director at the time, and I was talking his ear off and bugging him, and he just finally looked at me and said, "Shut up, take this microphone, go up to the scoring tower, and announce this race." It was Tag Masters. I knew that class because that was what I raced in, and that was back in, gosh, 2010, I want to say. And since then, it's been a pretty cool ride. I now work for IMSA, the International Motorsports Association, where I'm a public address announcer for them. I'm their trackside PA announcer. And then I work for the Mazda Road to Indy. I am their TV host. I host a show that covers all the goings on there. And then I also work as a lap by lap and series play by play announcer for the Global MX5 Cup, which is a series put on by Mazda. It's their sports car coupe. And then when I get a chance, I come back and do as much karting as I possibly can. Actually, while I'm talking to you guys right now, I'm enjoying a little bit of a break between the Daytona trips for IMSA. I'm actually at Pat's Acres Racing Complex up in Canby, Oregon. And to both of you and anybody watching, if you're on the West Coast, if you're in the United States, if you own a go kart and are on the face of this earth, I recommend getting out to Pat's Acres in Canby, Oregon. It is, in my opinion, one of this country's greatest motorsports secrets. Really cool place. Just Google it. Google Pat's Acres Racing Complex, and you're really gonna be impressed. But to answer your original question, James, 20 minutes ago, yeah, I'm trying to do as much karting as I can this year. I've had a really good relationship with Marco Oldhofer at the Gear Up challenge presented by the F Series out on the East Coast. Those guys bring me out to do every race that I don't have a conflict with Road to Indy or IMSA. This year they're going to Kershaw, South Carolina for their season opener, and I'm free that weekend trying to make it work to go out there. And then right now I'm scheduled to go out to Houston, Texas, and announce the opening round of the Texas Sprint Race Series. That's a really cool four-stroke series out in Texas that Tim and Brittany Lobaugh run along with Matt Souza and Chance Kelly down in Texas, and we're going to Alan Rudolph's place down there in Houston. And I'm scheduled to do that the weekend of the Daytona 500. So trying to hit as much karting as I can, but the schedule just gets very full, unfortunately, some years.
Yeah, it sounds like you're pretty busy. All right.
Yeah, last year we did 110 flights, going from racetracks back to wherever I call home that week, and I love it, man. And like I said, what you guys do at KartPulse is so cool because to me, you're going out there and you're helping the folks that, they love karting or they want to love karting, and you guys are given that very approachable entry source of information to get into the sport that we all love. That's done so much for me as a career. Eric and James, I know it's done a lot for you guys, and so yeah, we've been busy the last couple of years. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, it's the sport's given a lot to me, and it's the kind of sport that, well, I mean, I think it's true of a lot of sports that you start when you're young, but they're part of your formative years, and once that happens, there's no real shaking it out of your system. My closest friends are from racing. Met my wife indirectly through racing. I've been at all my racing buddies' weddings and all that stuff. And that's just it bonds like that. Because I guess if you take it to an extreme at the racetrack, you're sometimes dealing with life and death. You're at least dealing with that, that whole battle of trying to do better for yourself, improving your performance all the time, and kick your friend's ass, and then try and be friendly afterwards, and all
Oh
that
yeah.
jazz.
Oh, absolutely. I
So
mean, it's funny you mentioned that, and I heard what you guys were talking about just before I joined with entry level classes and where to go. I'm out here at Pat's today. I drove out here to go for just a jog around the kart track, and I'm getting ready to go out, and a family just pulls in the gate, and it's a young family, mom and dad, and the son was probably 13 years old, and the girl was 9 or 10, and they are just from up the road, and they didn't know about the place, and they were curious. And man, I had such a great time. I stood and I must have talked to them for 45 minutes to about an hour, just explaining everything from the LO206, the four cycle options that you both were just talking about, and then the gist of it being, hey, karting is such a great family sport, and it did wonders for me and my personal relationships with friends and family. And so, yeah, James, you hit on it, and Eric, I know you've enjoyed the same out in Colorado. Kart racing has done so much for me in my not only my career and my profession. I'm blessed to work in a job that I began in karting, but I have lifelong friends and people like Kurt Kissler and Rick Schmidt, who I mentioned. Um, they are as important and as close to me as family, or they're like other dads. Guys like Kurt Kissler and Rick Schmidt and Chris Egger, the owner out here at Pat's Acres. Those are guys that, as a younger dude, really helped me out a lot. So to anyone watching this, if you're thinking about getting into karting just because you want to go fast and you have a need for speed, well, it's got other benefits. It can mentor you, and it can really turn your life around. So I always say karting's better than just going fast. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, there's a lot more dimensions to it than just that. I've been really lucky to experience it beyond just the driving at this point. As an official, and then on the administrative side, and then now on the side of building the community and really advocating. Tony, you touched on something that I love doing and I look forward to doing. I've found myself now to where I'll go to a racetrack and I'll see someone there that I've not seen before, or I'll see someone on kind of the sidelines just watching, and I'll go up and talk to them. I look forward to having those conversations because it's always interesting to hear people's responses. You learn so much about the sport or what you thought you knew about it just from talking to those other people, and from listening to their perspectives and trying to communicate what you love so much to someone else and get them interested and excited about it
It,
is
it
really
exactly,
rewarding.
exactly. I mean, and yeah, it's perfect, Eric. I mean, and that's what I'm so blessed with the ability that I have through my job as the guy on the microphone over the loudspeakers is every weekend, whether it's the 12 hours of Sebring or a kart race at IMI or whatever it is, I'm just trying to make some kid or some dad or some person in the stands, wherever we are, feel the way I feel about racing. Because if it weren't for karting and if it weren't for racing, I truly do not know what I would be doing with my life right now. And it's honestly, when I want to stop and get freaked out, I give that thought some serious time. And you hit on it. To go up and meet someone at a kart event, whether it's a new family or a young kid or a guy our age, it's so cool to have this knowledge base that we all have, and to get to share it with someone, and hopefully introduce them into something that you love. It's like trying to introduce someone to a drug, except the drug isn't terrible for them. So you hit on it perfectly, Eric. I could not agree with that sentiment more.
So switching gears a little bit, one thing, I grew up, Tony, you may remember this now. Obviously, he's still involved in racing. He's kind of one of the most uh, well-known announcers, Rob Howden.
Hmm.
growing up in the pits, listening to him say, down the inside, book it, those sorts of things. How do
Yeah.
you, as an announcer, develop that style, those Howdenims, or in your case, Laporta-isms? How does that come about? Is that just natural, a kind of parlance of how you normally speak, or is that something that you work at? I've always been curious and always wanted to ask an announcer, but never got the chance to.
Well, that's a great question, Eric, and I appreciate it. And I'll just say this. I started announcing on it on literally, it was almost like a dare. It was like, hey, leave me alone, go up here and do this. And I went up, and I was I was an 18-year-old kid. I was so big I was racing in Tag Masters, which is typically, as we know, reserved for 32 or 35-year-old drivers and up. But I was so big I had no advantage in senior or junior. So when I started announcing, I called races back then, and I try to call races today like how I would describe them to you if you and I were standing on the fence. And a lot of times, I'll be honest with you, I'm not the most politically correct announcer, and I'm not the guy that's the most polished, and I'm not the guy that's gonna. Um, I'd like to think I paint a pretty good picture of what's happening if you can't see it. One of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten is when folks tell me, man, we were in the pits working on the carts, and we're 20, 30 feet away from the track, and we came jogging up to the fence to watch your race you were calling, and we'd be damned if we find out there wasn't 3 go-karts on track. And and then the only other thing I can answer your question with is the greatest compliment I've ever been given is when someone tells me, hey man, you announce a race just like you are as a person, which is real. I try not to butter anybody up at a racetrack. I try not to be a cheerleader for anybody. I try not to be a guy that wants you to know how great my buddy is at the track. I'm going to tell you what's going on that racetrack, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. And I've gotten screamed at, and I've gotten hollered at, and I've gotten knocked over after getting off the microphone for stuff I've said. And but
Knocked over.
yeah, I've been
That's not good.
I've had people disagree so badly with what I've said on the microphone at a karting event. They've put me on my back. Um, and to get back to your question, Eric, I guess I've just been calling karting for so long that you just do it. And I try to call the kart race like I would explain it to you on the fence. And I don't pride myself on being the most proper sounding guy or being the most etiquette sounding guy. I just call it like how I talk and how I live, and I'm just a guy that I like fishing and I like shooting guns and I like driving fast, and that's how I talk about my racing. So it's just doing it. Anything you do, you develop a driving style by doing it and doing it and doing it, and you develop a talking and a commentary style by doing it and doing it and doing it. So yeah, that's how I would answer that, I guess.
Have you done any announcing at all, Eric? Because you're a race director at least one of your local tracks, correct?
Yeah. So, well, with the Colorado Karting Tour last season, our normal race director, he had a couple things come up, so was asked to step up and do it for about half the season, a little bit more. And in that role, you're not really in an announcer role. Of course, I did have to get up in front of racers and do the whole big bad race director speech, which over time I found my own kind of way of approaching that, both positives and negatives. There were times when I stepped over the line and times that I probably didn't say enough to get people's attention. But just like Tony mentioned, I mean, you learn by doing in that sort of role. I remember a couple times when I was racing when I was younger, in I think 2006. There was a guy on the West Coast. His name was Dave Williams, and he would announce a lot of the regional and local races. And one of my favorite announcers that I've ever heard at a track, whether at karting or in any other level. And he would often let some of the kids come up in one of the, I guess, less interesting classes and try and announce. So I got to do that a couple times. Tony, I must say it's something that's always appealed to me because I think, just like you, I've been a racer, and so I would love to share that with other people and share enjoying it. But that opportunity just hasn't presented itself quite yet.
No.
But I have a lot of respect for how hard it is to translate what you're seeing visually and then put that into words in a running, coherent commentary. It's extremely challenging.
I've always found for me, I've done a little bit of announcing like 20 years ago, or at least I did a lot of it for rental cars. And the easiest part, for me at least, is what's happening on the track. That's easy to kind of go with the flow with.
Of
I think
course.
what makes the difference, like what separates the Tony Laportas and the Rob Howdens from the James McMahons, is the ability to tie that into the driver stories that happen in the pits and retain and regurgitate that information during commentary. Like, that's just way above my head. I can, and you can see my Facebook Live thing I did when I was at the Supernats. I could talk about what's going on the track all day. But in terms of like being able to relay that information from the background and the stories, I think that's what really makes the difference in the announcer. It's that special sauce with their own personality wrapped in. And, I think Tony's hilarious. He goes well with me because I'm Irish and I've got a really dry sense of humor, or a poor sense of humor, depending on how you look at it. But, it's there. And that's why I think Tony's really funny, because sometimes you won't even catch it. He's usually pretty kind of low tone and very relaxed. And I mean, sometimes he gets amped up, but for the most part, he's kind of just kind of calmly calling what's going on in front of him. And so he'll
Yeah.
just drop like some sort of hilarious little bomb in the middle, and you're like, wait, what was that?
Yeah,
You know?
and that's the thing. And James, I appreciate that. And Eric, I also appreciate your ability to step in from the role you were filling to then act as more of a, and you said it, you're not necessarily doing so much race commentary when you're doing what you were asked to do. You're just doing more of the housekeeping, the general, what we would call public address announcing. Hey, LO206 senior, you're on the grid in 5 minutes. This group, you're up in 10. But, James, just to your point, and something I've always wanted to let people know is that, at the end of the day, racing is such a great sport. It's so much fun. And I sometimes I get a little jaded because I've been able to come away from karting and I've been able to see karting from 1,000 feet up. Because 5 years ago I was in the middle of it. When I was traveling every weekend with the Max Speed group and we were doing the Florida Winter Tour, and then I was going to Texas for the Lone Star Grand Prix, and we were going to Bermuda for karting out there. It was my life. But now I get to see it and I realize that it really is it's a fun sport. And so I try to come at it with some levity. And I get comments all around the country when I go announce karting, and they go, "Man, you're funny. You're loose. You're funny." And at the end of the day, other announcers can choose how to commentate on a race how they'd like to. But I don't see the need in pretending that we're at a Formula One Grand Prix when we're at a kart race with 15 LO206s on track. We're at a kart race. And it is serious, and people spend money in it, and it is meant to be a serious affair. But why not have some fun and make people in the stands laugh and make people who are there maybe because someone they love is there and they don't particularly want to be there, but they're with someone who wants to be there. So why not try to make their day a little bit more enjoyable or teach them something through humor about the sport of karting? So that's how I try to come at every single race I announce, because there's a lot of people at these events who don't necessarily are not dying to be there, but they're there. So I try to make their day and their event a little bit more enjoyable.
So one really good question that we've gotten asked in the comments is by Wild Duck Racing. They're asking, as an announcer, obviously someone that is watching the track just as intently as many of the officials, I would imagine, to be able to capture all of the action. Are you ever put in a position where you're asked to make a call or officiate in addition to your announcing duties, or is that usually something that's kept very separate?
I will be honest with you guys, because this is a topic that I'm quite passionate about, because I have unfortunately seen very unholy relationships between series announcers in karting and the officiating the officials in that series. First off, to answer the question, have I ever been asked? Yes, very rarely. If it's an understaffed event with lack of officials, and almost always, I will say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. And it's a lesson that I learned years ago from Stan Bernarski, who's the operations director. He's kind of like the get everything guy out at SCUSA right now. He was running the Rocky Mountain Pro Kart Challenge as our series administrator back probably 2013, 2012, somewhere around that time frame. And I'll never forget, we were at Miller Motorsports Park out in Tooele, Utah, and we were out there doing a Rocky Mountain Pro Kart Challenge race. And they have a beautiful tower out at Miller, very big, very wide. I can see the whole track from up there, and an incident goes on out on the track. And because the tower was so big and so wide, when there were protests or when there were officiating discussions that had to take place between drivers and officials, they would come up into the air-conditioned announcer's booth and have that discussion. And I'll never forget, it was a young kid named Ryan Rudolph, who I knew, and he was involved in an incident. And as Stan and the race director and Ryan and his father were debating with each other on what the penalty should be, I probably impromptly stuck my nose into the discussion and said, hey, this is what I saw. And I'll never forget it. Stan Bernarski, he's a good guy. I really enjoyed working for him. But he snapped his neck at me, and he looked at me, and he said, you're an announcer. He goes, if you want to be an official, put down the microphone, go pick up a yellow flag, and stand out there in the middle of the track. And I said, yes, sir. And it was right then and there that I learned I'm paid to come and talk about the racing and describe it. I don't have the experience of officials. I don't have the education. I don't have the experience. I don't have any of the things that makes good officials good officials. So when I'm asked to do that, I almost always tell them that I don't feel comfortable and I won't do it, because I've seen officials in much higher and more well-known positions with higher series than I've worked for. And they will share the announcer's booth with timing and scoring, for example. And I will be honest, I've seen announcers in larger karting series influence the outcomes of qualifying sessions or practice sessions because they've told the timing and scoring official, hey, the race director doesn't know what they're talking about. End of this session. The race director might radio, hey, we'll give these guys an extra 30 seconds. There was a problem at the start of the session, and I've seen other announcers influence sessions and say, no, that race director doesn't know what they're talking about. Run the session to the time it was scheduled, and the race director has no idea. He thinks his order has gone through and it's being followed. So I very much got a bad taste in my mouth when I used to see that growing up, and I promised myself as a young announcer I would never use my position at whatever it is to influence the outcome of races. So it's a great question, but I'm very passionate about it.
That's a really good question. I would almost push back just a little bit on that. Having served as a race director, granted, just at a regional series, maybe not at the level of Stan, but I'll often find that the people that are the announcers, for example, Rob Howden or you, well, you may not be directly involved in that scoring decision or that administrative decision, and I think that's certainly appropriate to keep that separation. You guys do obviously know what you're looking at. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to describe it. So I wouldn't cut yourself entirely too short. But that was a really good insight. Definitely something that I didn't know. So I appreciate you sharing that perspective. To piggyback off of that, another thing that I've heard, kind of a recent trend from some of the officials in series like IMSA or Formula 3 or Formula 2, is that there are a lot of younger drivers coming from series like karting into, say, an MX5 Cup or a single-seater Formula car, and the level of aggression and their approach to racing and their level of kind of etiquette. People seem to think, at least I've heard the comments, that it's degrading or getting worse. What's your take on that as an announcer, both at the local level and now kind of at a more regional and national level in single seaters and sports cars?
Well, that's a great question, Eric, and I'll be honest with you. I'm lucky that I work with IMSA, because over there is such a great staff of race control folks. Bo Barfield is the race director over at IMSA right now, and to open wheel fans, sports car fans, you'll know the name. He was the race director for IndyCar for several years. Kyle Novak, who just assumed the duties as race director over at IndyCar, he was an assistant race director over at IMSA, and there's just an amazingly deep staff of folks over in race control. John Maskey, I know the Gear Up series is using John, and Marco Oldhofer just commented on here shortly, and I apologize for not saying hi. But John Maskey is a younger guy that is working in both karting and sports car officiating. But to get to your point, there's a very experienced road racer, and I feel embarrassed that I can't list all of his accomplishments, but his name is Elliot Forbes Robinson. And I urge folks to Google him and learn about him. And he is a senior member of the race control staff at IMSA right now. And I had a great discussion with him for 10 or 15 minutes in the garage area at Mazda Raceway Laguna Seca this year, where he talked about that. And he said that right now karting is becoming, and these are probably words I'm putting into his mouth, but karting, I feel at least, is becoming such a miniature Formula One. It's becoming such a miniature IndyCar, where we have these 18-wheelers and we have these folks spending 50 weekends out of 52 a year on the road racing. And the point that Elliot got to, I'll hone in on, was he sees exactly what you just said, which is these karting drivers coming up from, I don't want to name a series, but let's just say SCUSA, for example, that typically runs a softer tire. and he sees these kids get very aggressive on a soft tire in karting with no downforce on a go-kart, and then they come and they get into an F4 or they get into a USF 2000 car, and these kids are so used to charging the corner, and they're not aware of the effects, first of all, of downforce, and they're not aware of what it's like to drive on a tire that isn't ultra grippy on a
Hmm.
light piece of machinery like a tag or a shifter cart. So Elliot's suggestion, and again, I urge folks to Google the guy Elliot Forbes Robinson and learn about his career. His suggestion was when I said, okay, Elliot, what do you suggest? And he goes, we've got to get all the karting series to run harder tires. And the point, of course, is that these kids will learn in the karting ranks to be more mindful of a hard tire that takes longer to heat up, longer to get the optimum grip out of, and you learn how to not beat up a corner and rush a corner and drive more slowly. And I think it's a great thought, honestly. I do. And I don't have all the answers to fix karting and to make the developmental series into car racing, more even. But I thought that was a great point. And I think I just saw some article where Tanini from CRG is arguing for softer tires in the World Championships. He wants an even softer set of tires. And to me, it's just crazy because at a certain point, it's going to turn karting into a video game, but in real life. And I'm very fortunate to have grown up driving a Rotax, racing Rotaxes, and then announcing for Rotax. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Mojo had its problems. Mojo tires, you could Duro a set of Mojos and see a 6 point difference between two different sets. Their quality control was pitiful. But the hard compounded tires, I'll always argue that the best drivers came from hard tire classes. So I think that kids these days getting into Road to Indy racing or getting into F4 racing or getting into IMSA lights racing, they honestly do come from this very aggressive driving style, and that just doesn't fly in a Formula car or a junior sports car. So that's a great point, and I'm sure there's a lot of really good schools of thought on how to fix that and bridge that gap. Elliot's idea is, of course, to put a harder tire on and make drivers slow down to approach the corner, and I think that's a great idea personally.
That's a
Yeah.
really interesting take on it. I've never heard the tire proposal be suggested. I definitely think, if you look at, say, SCUSA or some other series, the tire compounds that are used today are certainly very soft. Um, Dave Wade has commented in our comment section. Thank you, Dave. That that's maybe what local club racing is for those more economical, harder
Mm-hmm.
tires. And I think it's interesting because you have to balance both the economics of a harder versus a soft tire, and also maybe that video game feel. I'd almost be curious, just from an academic standpoint, what a ultra soft tire would do to a cart, because I think you're getting to the point now where people's physical ability as well as their financial ability to keep putting those super soft tires on go-karts is starting to get limited.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but I never thought about it from the perspective of the tires themselves. John DeMaster commented and asked, Tony, will you be back with IMSA this year in Victory Lane as well as the support races?
Yeah, actually, John, I will. I just renewed with him, so thank you for asking. And it's such a blessing. Those guys take such good care of me, and I love it. They've allowed me to grow my role over there. Originally, I was brought on and was pretty much signed to a contract that said, you're going to do Victory Lane announcing, and that's it. And I thought to myself, hey, that's incredible. And then over the course of last year, my boss, I call her my boss. I work for the marketing department at IMSA, but a young lady by the name of Emily Nash has really stuck with me and put up with some pretty wild and at times stupid behavior of mine at racetracks. But she's allowed me to grow my role as a public address announcer, and I will be back for pre-race ceremonies with IMSA. We were just in Daytona last weekend for the Roar, where typically it's just testing for the WeatherTech and Continental cars. But this year they opened up the season for the IMSA Prototype Challenge, which features the Mazda Prototype Challenge. It's the Mazda Lights car, and we had a race there. And to work the PA at Daytona International was such an incredible thing. I truly can't put it into words. So yes, coming back for a second year with IMSA, and which in the middle of 2017 we didn't think was going to happen actually. Um, and then coming back for a third year with Road to Indy TV, which truly is such a surprise and a blessing. So yes, I will be back, and it'll be a very busy year of travel, I think.
Yeah, on the subject of tires, I guess there's two ways of looking at it. If I put my karting evangelist hat on, my approach would be I don't really care what cars want. Karting should just take care of itself. Um, but I mean, there's definitely efficacy for a harder tire, and I'm not really sure where going softer and softer really goes. I mean, uh, on the other hand, relatively speaking, there are no soft tires used in the US. They're really all medium tires as far as CIK is concerned, but
Mm-hmm.
they're still, like you're saying, they're pretty punishing.
Oh yeah.
Um, but definitely at the club level, we want to look at harder tires, and then of course, not just harder, but we need something that cycles well and gives people the durability that they need. That's the what's the word? I can't think of the word, but the magic that we're looking for in a tire. But when it comes to you know car series and so on, kind of talking about how kart racing should groom karters for cars, I kind of
Well,
you two know that about me. It's like, I don't know. But on the other hand, it does make sense. It's something that would more than likely benefit kart racing. I'm not entirely sure what the argument is really for softer tires, other than, you've got a lot more grip. And I think
well,
one of the interesting debates is which is harder to drive on or which is a greater test of skill. I think they both are difficult to drive on in their own ways. You can't really afford to slide around on a really soft tire, which sounds ironic, at least in my experience. When I ran a Formula 8 years ago, if you made a mistake, it wasn't that you just slid, you like practically cracked a rib, so it's like
yeah.
the stakes were high. That's what I found too. But Tony, you were going
Well,
to say something there. Sorry, I interrupted you.
no, I was interrupting you like three times. Well, you just because it's such a great discussion, and you hit on two things, and the first one I wanted to hit on when I started like throwing wells in there every 5 seconds. Uh, and I think the guy's name was Dave that commented and said that's what club racing is for. And
Yeah,
he brings up a good point, and it takes me back again to another discussion I had with Stan Bernarski when I was starting really doing a lot more serious announcing and karting. And Stan and I had this discussion, and Stan goes, well, the gist of the discussion was when he started karting, when Stan got into it, and what he'd like to see it get back to is karting today, in his opinion, is a ladder sport. It's just a stepping stone, as he put it. What Stan wishes, and this is one of the internal debates, that karting is full of so many great debates, and you can rack your brain and lose years off your life debating them with folks. But one of the classic debates in karting, and this could probably be a KartPulse podcast or an article or whatever, but the question is, was karting designed, and is karting today only meant to be a stepping stone? Or, as Stan Bernarski put it to me a couple of years ago, is karting truly its own sport? And Stan is of the belief and is of the desire that karting go back to what it was, in his opinion, started and designed and meant to be, which is its own awesome sport. Stan looked at it and said, hey, listen, yeah, there's guys that come in here, they just want to race for 5 or 6 years, get their experience, and go to the next big thing. But Stan goes, man, I grew up and I was watching guys like Ronnie White come out and Darren Elliott, and they didn't care about what they did next year. They didn't care about what they did in 5 years. They just wanted to beat you every single time they came to the go-kart track. And so this tire problem goes back to the question of, are we in karting trying to groom the future IndyCar stars, or are we in karting just trying to make our own badass sport? And that's the debate, and that's what I think we could fill up years and years and years of talking and going blue in the face about. So that's something Stansted. And then in all of my rambling, I forgot what my second point was, but I'm sure it wasn't that important.
I'm going to say there's no debate. That's going to be my stance. There's really no debate. Karting should take care of itself first. And I think we've gotten off course, especially in the last 20 years. And primarily or at least a lot in Europe with the CIK, their role appears to be to groom drivers and put them on the ladder towards Formula One. And that's where their money is. And that's all fine and good. Um, Kind of the way I see it is, you've got essentially those two segments, the stepping stone and, if you like, the non-stepping stone. Let's call them lifers. Um, and I think the stepping stone portion pretty much takes care of itself. It's got its own ecosystem, it's got its own money, it's got its own thing going on. I think the other side of the sport, which represents, I think, mathematically probably 96% of participants in the sport, um, is kind of resource constrained, and it's not seen as much growth as probably it should. But in recent times, it's seen an uptick. But really, the idea of karting being only a stepping stone to me is crazy. When you're talking about a performance vehicle, it's a vehicle that is designed to perform. It's not some 3,300 pound silly thing with passenger seats to bring people around. No, it's designed specifically for performance driving, pure driving satisfaction, nothing else. And so from that standpoint, I think it, it stands to itself as a motorsport, period. And I say that with some reservation because I'm also not big into getting into a one form of sport is better than the other. For me, it's just like karting is legit. End of.
Yeah.
Come and
Yeah.
try it. You'll like it, or you might not like it. You probably love it, and we'll go from there. But as I say, when it comes to the stepping stone thing, that ecosystem really serves itself. And then it's up to the rest of us to kind of try and move this other area. And then there's, of course, this overlap. How I came across the sport was through the stepping stone idea. Not with any money, but that was the dream that I had. I wanted to be a full-time professional driver. That went really well.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe I
you
could be a
joke.
full-time professional truck driver.
Well, I mean, you joke, and I can't believe it these days that I'm the one giving the talks and the speeches that I give. But even today, when I mentioned that young family that came out here to check out the kart track and everything, I find myself these days almost, which would knock anyone who knows me on their back, but I find myself being the voice of reason, which is crazy. But I tell people, I tell parents whose kids are hard-headed, and we have kids that come out here to Pat's or any kart track that I'm at, and I can see it. The kids 11, 12, 13, 14, whatever. And they're like I was when I was that age. And karting's it. That's all that matters. And that's all they care about. And I've stood in this press box with a mom and she said, "Listen, my kid doesn't really even know that much about racing, but he fell in love with karting and that's all he wants to do with his time. And he's begging us to spend our money on it." And it was like I was listening to my mother describe me when I was 15 years old. And I told her, I said, "I'll talk to your." I told her my story, which the short version of it was, I got into karting way too late. I thought I was going to be the next Tony Stewart. I was racing in tag junior, standing at about 6'1" and 200 pounds. Okay, and I was the guy that, because I like Tony Stewart, I wanted to go out there and fight every go karter I could find. And I got a real hard reality check when I got about 16, 17 that karting wasn't going to happen. My parents quit paying for it, and I sunk into a little bit of a depression. And the mom stood there and listened to me, and she goes, "Would you tell my son that?" And I said, "Well, Jesus." I go, I guess. And it goes back to the community that KartPulse fosters and the community that, yeah, I agree with. It's that karting should be its own sport. And that's what I just told this family out here. Karting is such a great thing. It's good for families. It's good for friendships. It's good for people. And so don't come into the sport like I did. Don't come into the sport like all of us probably did, expecting it to be, okay, I'm going to do 5 years here and then I'm going to go to USAC, or I'm going to do 5 years here and I'm going to go to Formula 4, or I'm going to do 5 years here and I'm going to go to Road to Indy. You can't look at it like that, because, not to be overly dramatic or getting too deep on you guys, but how do you enjoy anything in life if all you're concerned about is what happens when you're done with it? So I'm very much of your guys' belief, which is karting can be used as a stepping stone, but I don't think it was designed as that was the idea behind it when it was born. And people should just learn to love this sport for what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's interesting if you look at the comments that we're getting here. And by the way, Vince, Mark, John, Steve, and Dave, thank you guys for
Yeah.
chiming
Thanks,
in. We're
guys.
we're hearing a lot of the same comment essentially, which is, why can't it be both? We pose the question: is karting a stepping stone, or is it its own sport? And my response to that is yes. And what that means is it could be both. I think for there's no there must be a common reason and a core reason why many of today's quote unquote professional race car drivers started in karting. But there's also a reason why a guy who
Exactly.
is has a full time job and does something else also comes and races his 206 on the weekend. So I think both can coexist. I think it would be short sighted to not recognize that the landscape of karting, in terms of maybe the economic side of it, has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. In my opinion, maybe to cater a little bit more to that ladder system than what we used to see. But I don't think that people like Stan or members in the karting community have lost sight of what karting really is. When I talk to some of my friends, a Ryan Perry or a Seth Nash, who run those professional teams that really do cater to the ladder system type people, they're still in it because they love karting. And yes, it's something that they're good at and they can earn their living, but they do it because it's a sport in and of its own. And they want to be really good in that pool and in that sport. So I think it can be both at the same time, but I think
Absolutely.
it's about finding a way to balance those that really want to become really talented and really good, but also keeping it affordable and keeping it reasonable for the majority of people. Like James said, the 90% that really are not trying to be Sebastian Vettel or Kimi Räikkönen or whoever. And one thing that I have tried to push back against sometimes is trying to make changes for change's sake to make it more like that Formula car when, to be honest, you can still learn how to race as long as the rules are the same for everyone.
Yeah.
You can learn to race really well and become a very effective karting driver, or if you so desire, eventually grow into a racing car driver on a hard tire or a soft tire. You can do that in a shifter kart, or you can do it in a 206. As long as you're racing wheel to wheel with people, which is what karting offers at such an affordable rate and such a direct way. I think as long as karting doesn't lose sight of that, that will be okay.
I agree completely, and I think that's a great sentiment of as long as you're out going wheel to wheel and racing with folks. And you know what? The LO206 thing sometimes gets this bad rap. Oh, it's not going 60 miles an hour. No, it's not, it's not this and it's not that. But I'll be damned if it's not some of the best racing I've ever had the good fortune to call.
Yep.
And then the kids out here up in the Northwest, they love it. And you guys were talking right when I joined in about, do you want to become an expert or a master of your machine? I think you said. And boy, the ability to do that with an LO206 is so friendly. You can become a master of that go-kart and you can learn everything about it and really feel confident in what you're doing and what you're out there driving. A lot more so than the ICC, a Tal cart that we've got sitting in the shop right now that needs a rebuild after every 10 gallons of fuel. So you're right. Karting can be both, and I hate when people try to reinvent the wheel. We've got what we've got. But even as a guy who's been able to make a living and has been very fortunate, thanks to karting becoming a miniature Formula One or a miniature IndyCar, where everywhere I go, I see 18 wheelers rolling in and 30 go karts are getting rolled out, and kids are paying 20 grand to be under the tent and this and that. If it weren't for those business models, I would not be able to travel around the country and announce the karting that I did. So I can't bite the hand that feeds too hard. But as a purist and as the guy that was a 16-year-old kid a bunch of years ago wanting to go racing with his mom and dad, I know that I could have never gone and done what these guys are doing these days. So it's bittersweet. And the karting just has to find a way to become its own thing and quit trying to be Formula One or quit trying to be IndyCar. And that will be, in my opinion, the great hill that karting climbs moving forward.
So, switching gears a little bit, moving away from what karting should be or shouldn't be. Jim Fry commented asking about Gunther Steiner, who is, I think, the technical director of Haas. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim.
Yep.
And he's talking about how they would love to have an American in their Formula One car, but that none are ready right now. So, moving just beyond whether karting is that stepping stone or not, as racers, do you guys agree with that statement or not?
James, you go ahead. You take that.
Yeah. I'm going to have you go first.
Well, it's a controversial topic, and here's the deal. Maybe I'm too much of the typical red-blooded American, but I do respect Formula One. I think it's a great sport, but I get a bigger kick out of watching the Chili Bowl 2 nights ago than I do out of watching Monaco. I think that's real racing, and I'm not suggesting that Formula One is not real racing. I'm just suggesting that. That there's other kinds of really good racing out there. And I want to say hi to Jim Fry, by the way. He's a great guy who I did a little bit of work with at the United States Pro Kart Series a couple of years ago. But
great name, too.
Yeah, great name.
Right?
Great name and good guy. But I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm a talent scout. I know a lot of people out there in the open wheel circles would argue that Joseph Newgarden has what it takes. I think there's still a lot of fans for Alexander Rossi out there, and there should be. He's a great driver and a good dude. And I've even seen people go as far as saying, Kyle Larson, who was racing in the Chili Bowl 2 nights ago, and he drives a stock car. They think that if he had appropriate seat time and preparation. So I guess I'm going to have to take a draw on this one, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys, oh, yeah, there's this kid racing karts out in Little Rock, Arkansas right now, and the kid can wheel, and in 10 years he's going to be the thing. No, I don't know that. I don't know if America has the talent. I will end with this. I saw Dale Jr. I think no, it wasn't Dale Jr. It was Jeff Gordon made a very interesting tweet, and he replied to the topic and the conversation. And basically, the gist of his tweet was, America probably won't have a Formula One quality driver until they're willing to send American drivers over to Europe, where they will learn and prepare and learn the trade of European open wheel racing. And until we do that as a country and commit our resources to sending our kids over to Europe, a guy like Jeff Gordon believes that no, we won't, and we currently don't. So I don't know. I simply don't know enough of the climate to tell you that yes, we do, or no, we don't.
That's very interesting that Jeff made that comment, because I don't know how many of our kart racers are familiar with the Team USA scholarship, but
Yep.
I think obviously Tony and James, you guys are as well. But I was listening to a podcast. I forget the name of the guy that runs it, unfortunately, but he was commenting that one of the first people he was considering for the Team USA scholarship was actually Jeff Gordon. One of the lesser known things is at the time when Jeff Gordon was coming into USAC and really kind of changed the perspective on the youth movement in terms of NASCAR and circle track racing just from his presence. He was also being courted pretty heavily to go into Formula 3 and Formula 4 by Jackie Stewart and also the Team USA scholarship. So that's an interesting thing for him to say, of all people. But I think the why of why maybe Americans aren't as prevalent in Formula One is interesting. I do agree with you, Tony, though, that I would personally rather watch the Chili Bowl rather than Formula One, but I do love both.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting perspective. I guess I'm curious what you think, James.
Yeah, I am not that in touch with F1. I got too much going on. But what Tony said earlier about somebody living there and there being Europe and just getting integrated with how it's done. I mean, if we think back of the modern day successful, well, first we got to kind of get a sense of what we want to consider success to be, right? So let's just say we get an American driver into F1 as being successful. If we look back, nearly every one of the drivers that has accomplished that from the US has done so by basically moving to Europe. Unless, if you go way back, sure, back in the 60s and 70s, it's a little different. But I think in modern terms, let's say the last 20 years, for the most part, it's been, even not American, but if you want to say Canadian, I don't know how controversial that's going to be. But if you want to say like Jack Villeneuve or something like that, they committed to racing over there. Juan Pablo Montoya, okay, he's Colombian, but, again, if you want to say from that side of the globe, and saying success is going to be getting an F1 drive, then you got to live there. You got to just like anything, you've got to network with the people and be in front of the people that you want to work with, and that's kind of difficult. Like Skype is great, but that's not the same as walking by these people all the time in the pits and making connections and talking with them and just being able to drop it out of a hat. I think as much as I'm a proponent of the internet and how it's changed things, I don't think it's changed enough in that respect. So that'll be my 2 cents. I think you got to get on a plane and go over there and buy a car and sleep in the car or something. Do the Nigel Mansell thing maybe and just rough it for a while.
Well, and I will say, Eric, I think you're referring to Jeremy Shaw with Team USA.
Yes.
Yeah, Jeremy's a good guy. He's on the mic with IMSA Radio. People would be able to hear him coming up in 2 weeks at the Rolex 24 at Daytona. He's on the commentary team for that. So he's a great guy who is a catalyst and very strong in helping get young American race car drivers into positions of prominence in open wheel racing. So that's a good guy to hit on.
What do you guys think about? And John Kreider commented. He's wondering what our thoughts are on guys at Daytona turning GT1 lap times. I think he's referring to some of the laydown karts. I'm not 100% familiar. Maybe John can clarify. But what do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I'd like a clarification just to make sure, because when I was out at the Roar last weekend I was hanging out with just a great guy and a great proponent of karting who I think would be a great addition to one of these shows. His name is Rick Folks, and he is a
Yes.
race director from the Midwest. I met him doing the Lone Star Grand Prix out in Lockhart, Texas, and now he's the race director. He's going to help run. He's going to run Quincy at the Park as the race director, and he works as USAC's karting race director. Just a great guy who I think would add so much to one of these style talks. But Rick goes out there and he's run every Daytona Kart Week they've ever had. And he showed me video of his twin 125cc sedan laydown, and they were hitting 158 miles an hour out there on the high banks in Daytona. And I can't speak to the lap times because I don't know. I think if you're asking my opinion on it, I think it's freaking crazy. I think it's I think you have to have giant balls to drive a go-kart around a place that has essentially concrete walls covering every inch of it, and you're in a go-kart. I mean, we sat in the spotter stand. Rick was working there as a spotter that weekend for one of the prototype teams, and I mean, he could point to you at places around the track where people have died in a shifter kart, and it's not something to brag about, but that's such a cool niche of karting, Daytona Kart Week, and then to see those laydowns go out there and run the big track, I mean, that's cool. But at the end of the day, as a guy who works in media, and I'm trying to always look at the image of our sport, I look at it and go, okay, how do you get people to come pay to watch it? How do you get people into those seats at Daytona? And it's a doable thing because in the grandstands at Daytona, you can see that whole racetrack. But again, our problem is if you think it's hard to recognize a GT car, a Corvette or a GT going down the back straightaway, it is way harder to see a go-kart going down that back straightaway. So
Right.
size and the just the nature of our sport pigeonholes us sometimes for marketability and relatability, but I think it's great. I hope Daytona Kart Week goes forever. I think it's a pilgrimage. A minute 57 lap times.
Yeah.
That's no joke. I mean, to do that
Now,
track in a minute 57 is crazy.
to caveat that, did the GT1 car run the chicane?
No, actually they do.
Oh,
That's the one thing that
okay.
the
So that's
Daytona
going to
Kart
be
Week carts
a
don't.
factor too. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, karts are as quick as Formula cars. It surprises me that there's still a debate or discussion about that. Like, it's a racing vehicle at the end of the day, purpose designed that drives. It's basically a motor in your body, right? It's a
yeah,
motorcycle. That's
yeah.
another thing that I don't understand a lot is when people say, oh, I can't believe a car goes that fast. Like, a motorcycle goes that fast. Why can't
Exactly.
you know? So when I started racing in Ireland, like 20 years ago, one of our tracks for the national circuit was a road course, and so we could get a really good handle on comparative lap times. And to use a modern example, Rotax Max with lap around, it's a short road course with lap at around 1 minute flat. Formula Ford Z-Tech was about 58 seconds. 125 shifter was about 56. 250 shifter was 53. Formula One car was 51. The
Yeah,
fastest lap around the track at one point, with the exception of the Formula One car, was a 250 supercar. It wasn't a Formula Opel, as it was called. I think that was Skip Barber over here in the US.
uh-huh.
But karts are fast, because we've got lots of grip. The only thing that really hurts karts is aero. We don't have a lot of power. We have really crappy aero. That's where the lay down enduros come down, like Rick Fox thing. I mean, it's incredible. I got to get out in the lay down someday. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I
it just
think
looked incredible.
I think having Rick on would be fantastic because I
Absolutely.
think a lot of karters, really all karting is mechanical grip, right? I mean,
Yep.
there's no aerodynamics really involved with it aside from maybe head ducking, which I think most people don't really think makes a difference. But if you look at some of the pictures of just his go kart, I mean, I don't think he has a diffuser on there, but he's got a lot of very interesting components. So I would love to just hear him walk us through that go kart, and I don't know how much he would share, but it
I think he
is.
would tell you more. I think he would tell you guys more than you think. I mean, obviously they've been working at it for years over there, him and his brother Randy. But if that's a thing, and I don't know if either one of you have connections with him, but Rick is just
I do.
he's such a great guy, and if you can get him on something like this, he would be able to give such a great technical and then driver point of view on things that we're talking about now. But he'll do it in a very funny and very easy to understand way. So I definitely urge getting Rick on one of these.
Yeah, Rick. I actually have a picture of his laydown because I thought it was so beautiful in the karting 101. So I can reach out to him, and I'm sure he'd love to be on the show, especially if it's to talk about his go kart. I think one thing you guys all know is as long as we get to talk about our own go karts, we can talk forever and ever.
Yep.
Um,
Right.
And so that would be fantastic.
I'm trying to get a pic of Rick Fox here, of it, well, not of him, but of his cart.
Oh,
So
Oh,
you guys
get
it's
talk a little. I'll pull up
get one
here.
of him.
So for people who
He's a
haven't seen it,
marvelous
you need to
man.
see this thing.
He's a great guy to have on. I joke, but yeah, if you guys reach out to him, or if you'd like me to, it doesn't matter. I think he would jump at the chance, and he'd be very funny.
so the comment disappeared because we're actually getting so many coming in. But someone mentioned the Dinner with Racers podcast with Jeremy Shaw. So thank you for mentioning that. Because yes, Dinner with Racers is one of my favorite, and that's where I heard that story from Jeremy. Really an interesting listen if you haven't heard it. Another question we got, a little more karting centric perhaps, is from my friend Greg Welch. So thank you for listening. He's asking about our thoughts on the KA100. I know that was something that was batted around the KartPulse forums a lot, and it's actually, I think it's one of the most popular threads. It keeps coming back. Well, people initially they talked about it coming from Australia, and then now people are testing it and coming back and reporting what they've been seeing. So, what are you guys' experience and thought on that engine package?
Um, Myself personally, unfortunately, I know so little about that setup, and I was trying to keep an eye on things on Facebook. Hi to Greg Welch. That guy, he didn't say hi to me in the comment, but I understand because I took more years off that dude's life probably when I started working on go karts. He was my parents hired him to be my karting coach, and he was attending school at the University of Northern Colorado up in Greeley where we lived, and that guy spent a lot of nights in my garage trying to teach me how to tighten and loosen nuts and bolts. And Greg's probably done a fair bit of drinking over his time spent with me, but him and his family owned Shockwave Karting, which was a mainstay in United States karting, especially in Colorado. So while I know nothing about the K100, I know that Greg Welch is a solid dude, and it's probably very largely in part to him that I'm doing what I'm doing for a living. So I just had to say that to Greg and James. I'm interested in what you actually know about the K100.
I don't have any first-hand experience with it yet, but from what I can tell, from the conversations I've had, and from, as Eric said, we've had a pretty long discussion and detailed discussion with people kind of coming back with their feedback on the motor, including a lot of guys in Australia that were not happy with it. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're reading those comments, I guess to an extent, you kind of have to filter from the perspective that, well, as always, there's, how should we put it, there's sometimes a conflict of interest with some folks who are heavily invested in KT, for example, which is what it replaced in Australia. But from what I can tell, it's, the pricing's aggressive even without the incentive packages. From what I can tell and what people have reported so far, the reliability is there, the parity is good, the tunability and getting it up to pace seems to be good. So all around, I mean, it seems to be a really good package so far. And it has been run in some pretty good, tough competition with the RIT 66 series, and then the USPKS. And then there's a handful of others, and I'm just going to apologize in advance. I'm not sure who they are, but I'm sure there's got to be probably 100 out there racing right now. They've started to pop up at my local track at Stockholm Motorsports, Stockholm Karting Centre, just down the road from me here. And it looks like they're going to get a class together next year. It's it's always a quandary because there's so many Yamahas out there and they're so cheap to buy. But I think a lot of the frustrations for them are, again, parity issues, especially if you haven't had them blueprinted. It'll be fine for practice if that's what you're
Yeah.
doing, but it's not going to do so great for racing. And then the clutch, is another tuning item. And again, when we go back to the conversation we had earlier, people mostly want convenience. And again, as far as I'm concerned, the sport needs to adapt to that or almost, die. Bit of an extreme point of view. We're probably not going to die, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, I think the closest thing you could do with that is maybe a direct drive or a low stall clutch piped KT100. But then some people want to go for the can. To me, the can KT100, I honestly, I love two strokes, but if I'm going to have a two stroke and my option is a KT100 can, I'm just going to do a 206 because it's as much fun and a lot less work.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but it seems to be good. We'll see how it pans out. There's always a lot of hype around things, you know. Every time it's the new engine, it's the new tires, it's the new whatever, it's the new sprocket or widget or whatever, and it gets, you know, I kid with Davin Roberts' tournament, I call it the hype train. You know, another press release again comes out, you know, oh, this is the best thing ever, but they rarely actually go into any details about why it's better. You probably notice that we don't share a lot of that kind of stuff on our page because, you know, you gotta show the money, you know. You're gonna make a claim, you gotta back it up somehow. But overall, I think the KA has done a better job of showing real value to kart racers than some of the other packages have. It's a shame that we've got, you know, so many different packages that are kind of incompatible with each other. But again, that's the byproduct of, you know, the free world, right?
Yeah.
What about you, Eric?
Yep. Well, I mean, I've had the fortune. I don't know. I haven't known Greg quite as long as you have, Tony. But you know, he is definitely a solid guy and does a lot for the community here in Colorado.
Yep.
Definitely was instrumental in suggesting that we at least evaluate the KA100. And he put his money where his mouth was. He bought a KA and ran it and drove it, abused it, and he's managed to generate some interest locally. I'd say my thought on it so far is somewhere in the middle. You know, I grew up racing the KT100 Yamaha, and then also the KPV, which in my view, this K100 is kind of the new updated version of. And, you know, because I raced those and because I had so much fun racing them, I love them. And when I look at the K100, I see a lot of those same traits in it, except with a kind of even better quality, more reliability, and in that tag format, but done in a tasteful way. So on the surface, all things look great, but obviously you really won't know until you have a lot of them out there racing, and you won't know until you see really where people are putting their money. We are very fortunate locally to have a great 206 contingent. So one other thing that I'm curious to see is it enough of an incentive for people to switch from 206, or will they run both? Or
Yep.
will they all switch over to K100? As you
Yeah, it'll
mentioned,
be
James,
interesting.
there's so many karting engines out there that introducing a new one into any market or any region is tricky if not done correctly. So I guess I'm kind of in a wait and see mood, but I like them a lot. I think it's a cool idea. Um, Jonathan Gashell commented that he says he remembers running lap times at Putnam Park in a controlled enduro laydown kart, I think, that were faster than Dodge Vipers. So that's kind of a cool little story. And he's also said to come run a CES race, James. I'm not sure what CES is, but you might know.
Yep, Championship Enduro Series. It's a Midwest regional road race series that I ran. I ran it for 4 or 5 years until I stopped racing and started KartPulse, basically. And yeah, great series. They run at Blackhawk Farms, Gingerman Raceway, Gateway Motorsports Park. Tony, when you're talking about concrete walls earlier, I can relate to that because
Yep.
coming up from the banking and Gateway, you know, you're in fifth and you're just holding it sixth. You're just going along, you know, 109, 110. You're like, that wall
Yeah.
does
It's
look
it's no
very
joke.
uncomfortable.
I certainly respect, and I would jump in one if I was given half the chance. But to go out there and race as an endurance guy, and that's your main source of competition, is out there where there's concrete walls. I mean, I respect those drivers, and anybody who does enduro and lay down that kind of stuff. It's no joke. But yeah, if you go out there, make sure your life insurance is nice and good there, James.
Yeah, well, I just want to step in and talk a little bit about the road racing thing because I hear that come up a lot about people being concerned about barriers, and that's a valid concern in that if you hit a barrier, it's really bad, obviously.
Yeah.
But honestly, most of the road courses that I've been to, there's a huge amount of runoff.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Daytona, Gateway, they're pretty much the exception to the rule. But in my experience, at least, with the circuits I've run on road course, touch wood, I've never hit anything. I've gone off the track at well over 100 mile an hour where I had a wheel come off because the spindle sheared, and I still stopped before I got to a wall. So I think that comes up a lot, and I love road racing, especially for older people like me that want to race shifters that just can't hack it on the sprint track. Road racing's a great way to go. Great way to get your shifter kicks and run, you know, a little bit quicker than like a Formula Ford or whatever. with 40 other racers.
Yeah.
But kart tracks are designed to have runoff for cars that weigh, well, full-size car, 3,400 pounds or more, or Formula car. And your kart usually weighs, if you want to go to the extreme, a supercar, 450 pounds. And momentum, if you go off the track, you're going to stop a lot sooner. You can get sideways, go off the track at 100 mile an hour in a kart, and, I wouldn't advise that you do it. But if you do, you're pretty much going to be okay. But there's some track. Safety is personal. Safety is very subjective. And this comes up a lot on the KartPulse forums too. We've been talking about neck braces and neck collars, and if anybody's interested in that topic, go ahead on the KartPulse forums. I'll put up the address later. But safety is as much chance as it is. You want to give yourself the best chance, and that's really about accommodating your own personal safety and comfort level.
Absolutely.
Some people would not be comfortable doing 100 mile an hour in a kart, period, ever. And some people are like, that's fine. And that's me. I'm okay with it. 160 on the banks of Daytona with 2 air-cooled motors. Maybe not. I say now I'd probably try it. But the other thing is you can't really lift.
No.
If you lift in that thing, you're in worse trouble. So it's something else.
Absolutely.
So well, I want to say thanks to everybody who's joining the show today, and everybody who's commented. There's so many comments here. I'm not even sure what I could highlight here. People loving the K100. Greg Welch says hi, Tony.
Hey, Greg.
There's always one. Here we go. Leo Kozman. Wait, sorry, not Leo Kozman. John Howie. What do y'all like more, dirt or asphalt? There's always one. Let's just deal with it. I don't care, right? I don't care. Get in your go-kart, have fun. It can be dirt, it can be asphalt, or you know what I really want to see? I want to see a track with both. I want to have a rallycross track for karts. I also want to get ice racing going. But one step at a time. Eric, what about you? Dirt or asphalt, or is it another thing?
So I will say that I've been really lucky to drive both. Granted, I've driven both in race cars, not in a go-kart. I can't imagine concretely what a go-kart on dirt would be like. I can vaguely imagine it, but pound for pound and just the approach that people on dirt have compared to asphalt, I think is once you've kind of gotten your ego in check, I have to beat so many people or I have to win so many trophies or things like that. I think dirt's more fun in that it's laid back and it's, yes, you are adjusting the kart and you are adjusting the car, but it's a lot more in the hands of the driver. I love that aspect of it. Asphalt is very much that way. When you come back from racing dirt, you see so many drivers that do both become that much more successful on asphalt or pavement because they can run the car harder. They're more comfortable with the car not being as glued to the ground. Definitely, I know that I kind of look at the difference kind of almost a lot of great rock and roll musicians started as classical musicians, playing a piano or playing a violin. Not all of them, but some of them. And then evolved onto a guitar and improvising and all these different things. And I look at dirt racing as kind of the same thing, where if you're classically trained about apexes and about the feel of a car, and you go into dirt racing where you have this more reactionary driving style, it's that much more fun. I think both are pretty cool. I think it really depends on what's in your region. Someone in the southeast of the United States probably doesn't get quite as much, or at least for many decades, didn't get as much exposure to sprint kart racing as maybe a dirt oval. And I think both can be pretty cool.
Tony, do you have an opinion?
Well, I got a lot of opinions, unfortunately, but
no.
Here's the deal. I once was told by a guy named Chris Ferrari, who was a big part of USAC the last couple of years, and he made a joke to me. He goes, "The only thing asphalt's good for is driving to the dirt track." He's a USAC guy, right? Here's the deal. In karting, I'm going to say asphalt. Honestly, I do prefer asphalt on an asphalt road course, whether it's lay down or sprint karting. I think that's wildly entertaining. But Eric, I cannot agree with you more about what you said and the word that you were, not that you were searching for a word, but the word that I would use to describe what you just said is versatility. And in my opinion, this generation's and every other generation's greatest race car drivers have and will come from being versatile. I'm not going to sit here and be a homer and tell you that, oh, only the best race car drivers come from dirt. To answer the original question, I'll take asphalt karting almost every day, and only because, as you hit on the Southeast, a lot of WK dirt oval track karting down there. It's good, but what makes dirt racing so exciting is the ability to get sideways, the ability to get out of shape, save it, and stay fast. In karting, unfortunately, you look at WK Oval, Dirt Track Nationals, or whatever we're talking about, and it's kind of just it's like racing on a slick asphalt track.
Right.
So unfortunately, whether it's the technical package of the karts are allowed to run or whatever, you can't get that out of shape. Now, I've driven a rock shifter with rain tires on a dirt oval. Was that amazing? Absolutely, because you can stand on the thing in second gear and get totally sideways. But that's not what we're racing. We're racing four-stroke, full-bodied, round-nosed go-karts on these small dirt ovals. It's fun. It's entertaining. But Eric, you hit on such a good point of a classically trained asphalt driver that learns about, late braking, early apex, slow in, fast out. You put them on dirt, you're going to make yourself an amazing race car driver. And so when it comes to go-karts, asphalt for me. When it comes to almost anything else, I like to see it done on the dirt.
Good deal. Yeah, I don't, I don't say I don't care, but I don't care. Just race. I mean, seriously. Um, I don't understand the whole like asphalt is for getting the track. I mean, dirt is for potatoes.
Yeah.
What does that tell you? I mean, it doesn't matter. They're
No.
both awesome as far as I'm
No,
concerned.
no, and that just
Um,
comes from a very biased, USAC member who, 80 nights a year he's at a dirt track. So we all root for what we grew up doing. And so for us in this room who grew up racing go karts on asphalt sprint tracks, we get to be biased towards that. So I'm with you, James. Just race. I don't care what you're in, where you're at, what you're doing. Just show me a good race, and I'll pay you money to watch it.
So, as we mentioned, we've gotten so many awesome questions in the comments here, and for whatever reason, I can't even scroll through all of them. I'm getting so many,
no, I
but
can't either.
my friend Adam Kasich, he's asking thoughts on drop down bumpers, and who do we think is the best current senior driver? I think he means in karting, and not senior in terms of the oldest, but in terms of the senior class. Tony, I think you probably have a little more experience. With kind of the current national karting level. I have a little bit of that sense from working with some of those really capable drivers. But I'd be curious to hear your take, and then also you, James. I think you've been to the Super Nationals, you got to watch, but yeah, I'm curious to see.
Absolutely. I see Adam's comment right now, and at the end he says, "Go Wizards." And Adam, I'm right there with you. Go Wizards. Adam recently, not too recently, actually moved up to Windsor, Colorado, where I had the great fortune of going to high school and living my life. So go Wizards. That's home for me. But I am I do have an opinion on this. I will be honest and be full disclosure when I say that the last 2 years with Road to Indy and IMSA commitments, I have not been able to hit as many karting national races as I'd like. Had you guys asked me this back in 2015, 2016, when I was calling 20 national kart races a year and I was on the road from Florida to California, I'd feel more confident. But from what I keep up on and what I see on social media and the results I see, I'm really impressed right now with how a kid named Ryan Norberg is doing. And he spent some time with the Ocala Grand Prix team, and now he's with PSL. I know it's a little controversial to people who are aware of the situation, but he and Jake Craig have probably still some pretty bad blood. But I think both those guys are, with the politics and the other stuff aside, Jake's from California and Ryan's from Florida. They are both. I saw Jake Craig. I got to call the U.S. Grand Nationals in 2016 at Sim Raceway in Sonoma, California, and Jake Craig and Oliver Askew had an incredibly epic battle and a last lap, last corner pass for the win around the outside that Jake pulled on Oliver, who is now the current USF 2000 champion and making his way to IndyCar as we speak. I like Jake Craig as a just quiet, methodical driver, and I like Ryan Norberg a lot. He's very aggressive. As far as senior drivers in this country go, both those guys are I'm big fans of.
And then the other component, Tony, what are your thoughts on the drop down bumpers? Just to jog your memories, if you may not be familiar, SCUSA, as well as a couple other series in recent times, have been using these bumpers that essentially push back in to emulate kind of what the CIK FIA emulated in a number of iterations to try to cut back on aggressive driving to eliminate that front to back contact, people punting each other going into corners.
Here's the deal. It's tough. And I get to say that I'm blessed with my time up here in Pat's Acres up here in Oregon. The Egger family owns it. And Chris Egger was the national race director for SCUSA for a very long time. And he was the national race director for the Florida Winter Tour when it began. He took a hiatus. He came back when we all went to work for Max Speed. Chris is an amazing official. His daughter, Maddie, is one of the most passionate karting officials when it comes to getting something right I've ever worked with. And his son, Cameron, is a great official, very good chief starter, good flagman. So my point is, when I'm not on the road and I'm up here in Oregon, I'm always around a family of officials. Literally, when Chris was when the kids were younger, Chris would come back from races and ask the kids, "Okay, here's what happened. This was the scenario," and he'd be quizzing them at bedtime. 7 and 8-year-old Maddie and Cam, what would you have done? And Cam and Maddie have grown up to be kart officials, is what I'm saying. So I get to hear a lot of discussions about this topic, and I get to hear discussions about just officiating and how hard it is. And I truly think that whether it's the NFL or IndyCar or karting, people don't value the job of a good official, because whether it's one guy at a club race at IMI in Denver and there's 12 LO206s, or it was the Florida Winter Tour when we had 38 senior karts on track, there's 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 race directors in the middle of the track trying to watch 40 go-karts. That is incredibly hard. And I wish the common karter would understand how difficult of a job it truly is to get it right. Because people have no problem screaming and hollering and cussing a series and bad-mouthing it on the internet when they don't have half of an idea of how hard it is to be an official. And so I say all that to answer your question. I think the drop-down bumper system in spirit, great idea. Man, it's awesome. I like where your head's at, whoever came up with it. But the execution of it and the ability to monitor it is just so incredibly hard, because there's the classic argument. What happens if I'm running in third and I get brake checked by the guy in second? I never ran up his backside and my bumper drops down and then I get a 5-second penalty. If you're going to follow the letter of the rule, then you're out. If you follow the writing of the rule book, which, again, growing up with the Eggers, that is such the thing you have to do. You have to understand how the rule's written, and then how you read it is so critical to officiating. So the drop down bumper rules are pretty much, if your bumpers drop down, 5-second penalty, or whatever it may be. So what happens if you get brake checked? What happens if some freaky thing happens where you hit a curb and it knocks the bumper down? I mean, there's so many things that open those series up to, well, I didn't do that. Well, I didn't do this. Well, he did this and he did. I don't like it. And I understand it's Greg says it right there. Drop down bumpers don't replace good officials. They're a tool good officials use to do a better job. The more tools. See, so I started to agree with Greg, and I still do. It is a tool. I agree with him, but to me, it's a very complex tool. So I'm not a fan of them, but that's just me.
Yeah, and I think Greg brings up a good point there. A couple of the keywords that stand out. It's a tool that good officials can use to do a better job. If
Yes.
the official's lazy and just walks down the grid and doesn't take into account people appealing, or one thing that I think personally, I'm not super close to it, but one thing that I think is really interesting that Scoos has done is bring on more cameras. Obviously, I think more series would love to do that. They don't have the money to do it, but the fact that they can go back and replay the tape so that they can look at it 25 times until they feel like they've really got it right. The debate in other sports about instant replay and rather than a game day decision is always something to debate, maybe a topic for another time in karting. I think that that's something on the horizon that we should talk about as a sport, and whether we want that or not. But our series, the Colorado Karting Tour, we had to implement the drop-down bumpers, or rather, I shouldn't say we didn't have to, but we chose to. And I would say we didn't really notice an effect either way. And I think I'm a little too close to it to really be able to comment as best as someone on the sidelines. But I do think it's an interesting way to try and address some of the aggressive driving or some of the issues that you see at maybe regional or national levels. Switching gears a little bit, James, I'm curious to see what your thought, just going back to the kind of the best driver. Maybe a thing to refocus on is, what are some ways to keep karting fun, which is kind of the mission of KartPulse. What do you think we should be focusing on, whether it's outside of the minutia of drop down bumpers, or is the K100 a good engine, or should drivers be less aggressive coming up into open wheel categories? I mean, zooming back up to a 40,000 foot view, what do you think we should be keeping in mind, and leave some of the people that are watching the show with to ponder until we do this again?
For keeping it fun, I mean, I'm not an expert on it. It's more of a, that's our overall thought and that's our goal. It's like anything else, it's something that you strive to achieve. But I think really it comes down, a lot of it is just setting reasonable expectations for yourself and understanding that when Tony drops a pen live on TV, nice. Where was I? Just being realistic about what your options are. And that means your budget, how much you're going to be able to travel, how much you're going to have. A lot of it comes down to that. And I know this, at least from my experience, because I always try to race shifters on the equivalent of a 206 budget. And, your outcome with that is going to be varied at best. And as long as you understand that, then you're probably going to be okay. But I think a lot of it just comes back to setting your expectations, whether it's your own ability or how often you're able to practice, your budget, and all those kind of things. And I guess the other part of it too is try and find what type or style of karting appeals to you. It may be racing, it may not be racing. You have a classic example. My wife loves karting. My daughter loves karting. Neither of them have any interest in racing whatsoever. Zero. They just want to go out and drive a kart as quick as they can. So for some people, that's going to be what they want to do. For some people, they want to race. They don't want to wrench 206. Some people don't want to race. They want to build crazy ass CR 450 things and go around the sprint track. Go do that. That's the thing. That's what I love about kart racing, is that it's so dynamic. But it's not apparent. Usually you will stumble across one section of kart racing and you kind of get sucked in, So our approach, with KartPulse, is to try and bring all these different kinds of kart racing together, whether it's dirt oval, whether it's pavement oval, whether it's, rentals at the local track, whatever it is, whatever works for you. Really, that's what it comes down to. And there's sometimes in conversations as racers, we have a tendency to tell other people what we think will be fun, when really what we're talking about is what's fun for us. I saw a comment earlier, somebody was saying, to make karting better, we should get rid of spec. Well, the numbers just don't support that. I mean, if you look at 206, period, like spec works, whether we like it or not, whether it works for us individually as older racers, none of that matters. The market doesn't give an S to the T. All that matters is what's going to work for the market. We can move towards that or we die. So, my thought is, let's get people in with, bite-sized chunks, let them have fun. And then as time moves on, they'll probably want to move on to something faster from, 206 or whatever. It depends. But, again, set reasonable expectations, be honest about your budget, and, explore your options that are around you and see, maybe you want to do dirt. Maybe you don't want to do dirt. Maybe you want to do asphalt or road racing. Maybe the idea of running on huge road courses that you see on TV, like Mid-Ohio, appeals to you. Maybe it doesn't. That's what's great. There's an abundance of options, and in a way that's overwhelming. So it all comes back to having a conversation with somebody on our forums, for example, to see what's going to work for you. So that's how I think you keep karting fun. Mix it up. For me, when I've been able to kart, I mix it up between just literally fooling around the track at the local track or competition. And I think this year, I think what I'll probably do is be one of those crazy CR 250 guys, and just tinker around with that for a while. And that'll work for me. And, I'll put the 206 on another weekend and race to the local track with that. And that'll do. That'll keep me happy,
Yeah.
KartPulse keeps me busy enough with stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Tony, I know when we spoke in Indianapolis, you had a lot of actually really interesting insights on one of the distinctions that you'd said was you made a distinction, should I say, between karting. Was it you said karters and kart racers, something like that?
Yeah. You hit on that. Our quick lunch meeting in the Indianapolis airport, and it's a debate, not a debate, but it's a discussion that again goes back to Chris Egger, who I can't speak highly enough about that man, and I hope everyone in karting gets a chance to someday be either officiated by Chris or someday meet Chris, because he's a truly good man, racing or otherwise. But he and I just one day fell into a discussion out here, or maybe it was coming back from a Florida Winter Tour race, and we talked about how there's karters and there's kart racers. And the distinction essentially is that karter is someone who exactly is what you just described, James. Maybe he's a guy that has an L0206, and maybe he's a guy that one day rips that off, sells it, pawns it, whatever, and goes and gets, you know, an Iami or a shifter kart or whatever. And he goes out, he runs more practice laps than he does race laps, and he just enjoys karting for karting. And then the kart racer, that is essentially distinguished as what we were talking about a little while ago, and that is the driver, that is the racer who wants to make a career out of this. And they're not necessarily looking to get out of karting, but more than likely they are. And that's how when we have these discussions and these debates, as what a kart racer versus a karter is. And so I guess I would say that the karter is your club racer, your track guy who's just out here having fun. And then your kart racer is your Ryan Norbergs, your Jake Craigs, your folks that are literally trying to make a career out of karting.
Yeah, I agree. You've got those two agendas going on, but keep it simple, like anything. It's especially in the information age, as we call it. Like, I think it's more of a curation age with the internet. It's just easy to get full of conflicting information, and really the best thing you can do is have somebody who just kind of talks to you, figures out what's going to work for you, and you go from there.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah. So I think we've just passed over an hour, guys, if not more.
Yeah, we have gone
Tony,
a long
thanks for
time.
your time.
Yeah, it's dark here on the West Coast. I know it's been dark on the East Coast when you guys started this. So I can't tell you guys how much fun this has been, and I truly want everyone watching this to know that whether you were listening at the beginning or not, I'd like to think that I'm a karter and I'm a kart racer and I'm all those things. But I won't lie. I've been out of the sport from the intense nature that I used to be involved in it. I'm not at kart tracks every weekend. I'm not in the sport of karting every day like I used to be. So I just warn everyone, take what I say and take my opinions with a fairly large-sized grain of salt. But I'll always talk karting, and I'll always call karting when I'm given the opportunity to. And James, I've told you this before, but I think what you're doing is really cool and really good because we've got a bunch of websites. We've got a bunch of folks out there that are the worldwide #1 best everything in karting media, and that's great for them, and I'm stoked for them, and I can't wait for ESPN to buy them out. But the fact is, that can be intimidating to some folks. And at the end of the day, I'm tired of reading press releases when I'm just trying to find out what I need for gearing on a shifter cart. So I love what you guys do. Eric, I guess unofficially, great to meet you. I think what this thing is right here is awesome. And I can't wait to see what kind of guests you guys continue to get. And I've just had a blast. And I truly can't say thanks enough for having me.
That's
Yeah,
awesome, man. Thanks for coming on.
yeah, thank you so much, Tony. I mean, you've answered some questions that I've had for years about some of the career you've had, and this is a really cool this Facebook Live. Thank you to everyone that's been commenting and interacting. It's we're up to almost 40 people viewing consistently right now, and that's great. So the discussion has gone on, I think, longer than we anticipated initially. So thank you, Tony and James, for hanging out and working with us on this. So. This is really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks, Tony. When I messaged you yesterday, I figured we'd just bring you on for 15 minutes and just have a chat and then let you go on your way. And, it's been a long 15 minutes, but thanks. You made it,
Yeah,
go quickly.
it's been a real long 15 minutes, but no, I enjoyed it. And I just want people to know that I love karting, and I always will, because if it weren't for the sport of karting, I would not have the life that I have right now. And I mean that in every sense of the word. I don't mean that to be melodramatic or heavy-handed. Karting has made my life better. If it weren't for karting, I wouldn't know the Egger family, who I pretty much live with during the off season, and I wouldn't have the career and the jobs that I do in motorsports. So thanks for you guys for continuing to promote it, Eric. Keep digging hard out there in Colorado, man. I love that state, and I love the racing out there, and I hope it gets back to what it used to be. Yeah, guys, just thanks a bunch. I hope to see folks that are watching this or hanging out at a Road to Indy race or an IMSA race come up and say hi. I'd love to talk to anyone who's a karter. Even if I'm busy and I look pissed off, come up and stop me and say, hey, you told me to do this on the internet. So, yeah, guys, I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to see what y'all do moving forward. And if there's an opportunity to do another one of these somewhere down the road, let me know.
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, guys, I really appreciate it. Hey, I'm going to get out of here, but you guys have a great night, okay? And to everyone watching, thanks a bunch. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Thanks, Tony. Talk
See
to
you
you
later,
later.
Tony.
See you guys.
All right. Well, that worked pretty well.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. I don't know, we probably reached a few thousand people, judging by our previous Facebook Live stuff. So that's cool. Eric, thanks for your time, my trusty co-host. And we've got more comments than we could possibly even deal with in this show. So that's great. We've got more topics for the next one, which is going to be in a week's time. We're going to try and do weekly. We'll see. This is the hard thing is live. You know, you got to be on the same bat time, same bat channel.
Yeah, that's absolutely the challenge. I think from the response we've got, I'm looking here on my Facebook page. It's about 1.4 thousand views, which is kind of stunning. I don't think James or I really thought it would get the reception it did. The interaction you guys have shown is above and beyond what we thought. I would love to do it weekly. Of course, it's about balancing our time. But comment below. Let us know what time you guys want this to work, and if we can make it swing, we'll work. Keep telling us, things you want us to debate back and forth, guests you want us to have. If we can make it happen, we'll make it happen. And sorry we didn't get to everyone's question. There were literally more than we could keep up with physically reading and addressing. So hope you guys liked having Tony joining us. He gave us so much time. So this has been a lot of fun for me. So thank you everyone for joining and taking part.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. By all means, come say hi on the forums.kartpulse.com, and talk to me, Eric, and all sorts of people who talk about kart racing. Get away with some of the noise on Facebook. Wait, we're on Facebook, aren't we? Well, anyway, you can go there and get off Facebook and, take a break after you've watched this on Facebook. With that, we'll leave you. I'm James McMahon. This is Eric. This way. And we'll hopefully talk to you next week.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bye.